Alright guys, welcome back to another video. For those of you who follow me on Instagram, we are finally here. I am finally making this video that I've been promising for the last day and a half. It's the beginning of the month. Things are crazy. But here we are. So, just the other day, I was listening to David Wilcock talk about some experiences he had as a kid. And it was really interesting to me because I had never heard anyone talk about having these experiences like I've had this experience. And he was talking about how when he was a kid, he would experience these fevers sort of out of nowhere. And when he would have these fevers, he would see like sacred geometry, mandala-like projections on top of things. And I've had that experience where I was standing in my kitchen, I was really overheated, and it looked like the Flower of Life design, really small, was happening all over my arm. And the light shines down directly in the kitchen, so it looked like the light was projecting through my arm and projecting a bigger Flower of Life onto the counter. Now, like I'd said, I had never heard anyone even talk about experiencing something like this, so this led me to want to do a video about all of the different mystical and paranormal things I've experienced throughout my life, because I've experienced a lot of them, big and small. I'm going to try to talk about this in chronological order, but we'll see how that works out. So, the first one that I can think of, I was 7 years old, and this was my first experience with a ghost. So, my dad was away on a business trip, and the way our house was laid out, the master bedroom was in the back, then my room, then the bathroom, then the kitchen and the living room were side by side. So I woke up in the middle of the night, had to go to the bathroom, was walking down the hallway and heard the distinct sound of a cabinet close in the kitchen in front of me. So I stopped in my tracks and said, "Mom?" And I heard from behind me, "Yeah?" And that freaked me out because the sound was distinct. So I spin on a dime, go running back into the master bedroom with my mom and say, "There's someone in the kitchen." And my mom goes, "Okay." We both walk out there. She walks in front of me. We both walk out there. Nobody's in the kitchen. So my mom, being who she was, turned to me and said, "Well, Annie, our friend John just passed away. Maybe he's coming to say goodbye to everybody." And so we sat down in the living room next to the kitchen at the fireplace with a little candle and said a little prayer to my mom's friend than mine, our friend John. Fast forward 2 years, Easter. I'm 9 years old. And anytime I got money on a holiday, it burned a hole in my pocket. I wanted to spend it. But back then, even on smaller holidays, you couldn't, there was nowhere to go really. Most places were closed. So there was this bookstore called the Psychic Guy Bookstore that just happened to be open. And I had been wanting to go there already for years. I was into everything, witches, fairies, spirituality, you name it, I was curious about it. So my mom said, "Okay, if they're open, we can go." So I looked them up in the phone book. I called them up to see if they were open. Sure enough, they were open, so we went. My life from that day forward was forever changed. That day, I bought this book and started to make friends with everyone that worked there. I was one of those kids who had such a huge vocabulary and seemed so mature for my age that adults wanted to spend time with me. So at 9 years old, I started making friends and a family and a home of this occult bookstore. And some of the paranormal experiences I experienced in there were awesome, but the one that stands out to me the most was the little girl. Now, this property where the bookstore was used to be homes, and the home that had stood there before the bookstore was burnt down, and there was a little girl who burned in the fire, sadly enough, and she haunted the bookstore. And when I say she haunted the bookstore, she haunted the bookstore. They wanted to do a seance. They even got my mom's permission to do it, for me to do it with them. We never ended up doing the seance, sadly, but we had some really interesting experiences with her. So for instance, you know, there might be 3 or 4 of us at any one time when there weren't any customers in the bookstore. So, you know, there would be the manager in her office in the front. There might be somebody at the cash register in the front. And then I would be in the back of the bookstore arranging books. And, you know, we would make sure that all the books were right up against the front of the bookshelf. And then you'd turn around and one of the books would fall out of the shelf or would get pushed back. And you were the only one back there. Everybody else was at the front of the bookstore and there were only a couple of you. And that's not the only thing. So this was the coolest, which was that if you cleaned the glass on the, or of the jewelry cabinet, every once in a while we'd see these little handprints. And my hands were too big already to make these prints, and everybody else in there were adults. So they couldn't have made them. And that's how we knew it was her. Because, you know, anything can knock books off of a shelf, but only little people hands can make little people marks. And getting to see those at such a young age was so cool. So a couple years go by, and I had started taking this Japanese sword fighting class at the bookstore on Tuesday nights. And just within maybe 6 months of me having this next experience, someone new had come to work for the bookstore, but he only worked there during the day. And I found him a little creepy because he was a little too old for me being 13. And so it was kind of weird that he seemed to have a crush on me. So I started keeping track of what car was his, because there were very rarely a whole bunch of cars in the parking lot. So it wasn't hard to figure out, because if it was just him, my friend who was the manager, and then my mom's car in the parking lot, you know, the manager had a little red car, he had a little black car with a red stripe around it, and then my mom's car was this big Chevy Tahoe. So I started paying attention to which car was his. So fast forward about 6 months, and it's raining, and one of my best friends in the sword fighting class that I was taking, his name was Jeff, and he had a black car that looked just like this creepy guy's car, only it didn't have a red stripe around it. So it's raining that night, his window's busted, and we're all taking turns making sure that the plastic that's around the window is secure so that no rain gets into his car. And it's my turn, so I go out to check on it, and all of a sudden I'm like, that's weird. He's got a red stripe around his car, but his car was all black. And I look over, and this is the first time ever where that creepy guy and Jeff were at the store at the same time. Because like I said, normally the creepy guy would work during the day, and Jeff would be there only once a week at night. So I had only had, up to that point, opportunities to tell whose car was who separately, never at the same time. So there's no way I could have gotten them confused. But Jeff's car was the only car out there with a baggie over the window. So I walk back and I'm like, hey, you know, how long did you get a new car? How long has your car had a red stripe around it? And he was like, my car's always had a red stripe around it. And I'm looking out into the parking lot because we were like out in the back under this underhang. And I'm looking over at this other guy's car, and it doesn't have a red stripe around it. And this is the first time I ever experienced what I would relate to what most people call a Mandela effect, or a universal shift. Now, I experienced some of the normal Mandela effects that people experience, but I also experienced them in ways that other people don't. One of the other first that I can remember experiencing was in 2003, when I was 14 and in my freshman year of high school, I got an English paper back from my teacher, and everything was correct except for the word before I had spelled wrong. And I'm telling you guys, before 2003, the word before didn't have an E at the end. I'm curious if anybody else has experienced this the way I have, because granted, I was never amazing at spelling. Granted, you know, I was never the best at spelling, but by high school, I knew how to spell the word before, and it didn't have an E at the end. And then magically I get to high school and it's got an E at the end. And everybody says it's always had an E at the end, but I know it didn't. That's one of the more small ones. So fast forward again, another 3 years. I'm 17 and I'm at my boyfriend's house late at night. And this is the first really crazy one. You know, a lot of people had paranormal experiences in this house. I wasn't the first one to experience anything crazy, but this was the first time I had really had any sort of up close and personal interaction with any sort of aliens or UFO type stuff. So the way that house was put together, the back of the house and the front of the house were kind of separated, but there were doors throughout the house where you could see out to the front, and then through the windows that were attached to the front of the house out into the driveway. So, like I said, I am not the only person who had not just some sort of weird paranormal experience, but like Men in Black sort of experience in this house. So I'm walking past the doorway, through the kitchen, into the living room, and this one doorway in particular looked straight out through the room, out the window, into the front yard. And as I'm walking past the doorway, I see this little face and these little hands of this thing, maybe 2.5 feet tall at best, staring at me in the window. And it is a little green alien. I swear to you, to this day, nothing else makes sense. It wasn't a little kid. There were no little kids around. It couldn't have been a cat. It was too big. It couldn't have been an adult or a teenager trying to prank us. It was too small. This little teardrop-shaped gray head, big almond eyes, little nostrils, mouth, spindly fingers staring in the window. And as I walk past and see this, it takes me a second and I do a double take. And I'm staring at it and it's staring at me. And its eyes get really big. And it turns around and it runs out into the bushes. And it scared the crap out of me. This little gray body running off through the bushes back out into the street. And we live here in this area really close to NASA, and they live even closer to NASA by like a couple of miles than even I do. So again, it's not unusual to have paranormal and magical experiences around here in general, but especially because we live next to NASA, we experience all sorts of weird UFO and alien interaction on a regular basis. More of a regular basis than anyone else does, at least. I wish that I had been brave enough to go running after it, because it took me a couple of minutes. Well, not a couple of minutes. It took me probably 45 seconds to get up the courage to go run to the front door and look outside, and by that time it was gone. It couldn't have been anything else. Like I said, it was the size of a small child, like a toddler. So any adult or teenager would have been too big to fake it. There were no little kids around, and they would have had to have had some prime cosmetics and have gone way out of their way to fake me out at 2 in the morning. We don't know anybody like that. So that was bonkers. And since then, I've experienced all sorts of little magical and paranormal things, including normal Mandela effect sort of things. But my most recent experience was several years ago in college. Our college, our community college, local community college, has a bunch of different hills. So the PE area of the local community college is set on top of a hill so that it sits about the same height as the stadium lights do down, not in the hill, because the stadium is down in a little valley. So the stadium lights and the hill of the PE area kind of sit up at the same level. So one night, I was getting done with our dance practice. It was probably 10 o'clock at night. The teacher had left me behind to close up because I was sweeping up, because you had to sweep the floor and it was huge. And, you know, as long as the teacher locked the doors, you could just turn off the lights, close the doors, and leave. So there's really nobody around at this point. Campus doesn't close technically until 11, but by 10 o'clock, 99% of people are gone. So I'm walking through the parking lot by myself. Nobody else is around, and I'm looking out towards the field, and I see this little light above the stadium lights. And I don't really give it much thought right first when I see it. But as I'm walking to my car, I'm like, that light's too bright to be a quadcopter. You know, I've had a good amount of experience with quadcopters and things like that, even old radio helicopters, because of my dad. So I start looking at it again as I'm walking to my car, and I'm like, that is sitting in one place, moving not even a little bit. It is perfectly still. A light hovering above our field. I don't see anyone down in the field, but I can't see completely. And I'm staring at this thing for probably a good 30 seconds, and it shoots straight up without moving in any forward, backward, side, or side direction. It goes straight up, and then it flies over my head and so far out into the distance that if it was someone who had a quadcopter, they would have lost it into the hills at least, and would have lost connection with it. It went so far and so out of sight, not to mention the fact that once it was overhead, I realized how big it was. It didn't have any green or red lights on it. It didn't have wings like an airplane. I didn't get an amazing look at it when it was overhead because I was trying to take pictures, and those just were like a blur of light that were like useless. Because of the iPhone camera technology at the time, with as old of an iPhone as I had, there, again, we're really close to NASA right there. And the weird thing is actually, now that I think about it, it didn't go towards NASA. It went away from NASA. So that's weird. But this thing had to have been tubular. Once it was overhead, I realized how big it was. I have no other explanation for this thing, because it was hovering perfectly still over our campus field, like probably a good 30 feet above the stadium lights itself, at least. And then it shot further up into the air, directly, went just straight up. No angle at all, not like a little bit up, straight up, and then flew straight out and over the hills and out towards the ocean. To this day, I still have no idea what that was or what it could have been other than some sort of alien technology. You know? And of all of these big and crazy experiences I've had throughout my life, you know, I've had other little magical experiences. Like, back when I was in 7th grade, before I had some of my bigger crazier experiences, but right when I was like really getting deeper into my spirituality, like 12, right around 12 years old, right when I started experiencing Mandela effects and things like that, I still have my first 4-leaf clover I found, and that's big. Like, you can see in comparison to my fingernails how big that is. It's giant. And when I found that, I wasn't looking through like a field of clover looking for a 4-leaf clover. My mom and I went camping. We had gotten settled in our campsite, and I was just kind of exploring, and I went to the edge of our campsite, saw this little patch of clover, and bam, there it was. Bigger than life. And it was even bigger before it was dried. So, it was probably about that big before it dried. I've had all sorts of ghostly and paranormal experiences. I've had all sorts of experiences pulling, different hoocha, negative, and bad energies out of people. And I've had lots of amazing high vibrational experiences just sitting out under the stars and doing ritual. But I wanted to share these with you guys because, like my experience with David Wilcock, hearing him talk about an experience that I had never heard anyone else experience the way I had, I wanted to put it out there for you guys. I mean, the more and more I get deep into my spirituality and raising my vibration, raising my light quotient, as some would say, the more and more I realize just how much we are spirits having a temporary human experience. There are times where I will look at myself in the mirror, and though, like, I know it's me standing in front of the mirror logically, but my brain doesn't recognize my face as my own. Or I will have moments where time will just slow down, and I will get this crazy existential wave of this feeling over me of like, just kind of like, wow, I'm here in time space right now. There's no real way to explain it. It's this weird out of body existential feeling of just being detached from my body and detached from time space. I cannot tell you how amazing it has been to get to live this life, learning to heal people, both practically and spiritually, getting to experience everything that this world has to offer, both apparent and in secret. And I can't wait to see what comes next, because they only get crazier and crazier as time goes on. Thank you guys for watching another video. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to check out the links in the description. I'm going to add Instagram. I'm about to put out my monthly email. I just do that one a month. And that's how you get in on any of the free stuff, as well as finding out what's going on this month in the Valence Blackwood tribe. I have my link to Patreon, where I get even deeper into the spiritual and practical tools that I use to raise my vibration and make life kinder and simpler for both myself and my clients. And last but not least, there is the link to my email, as well as to my free clarity call. If you want to work with me one-on-one to heal, grow, and expand, I want to help you do that. May the energy you serve you well, and let's keep making our way through. I'd love to hear from all of you, any of your paranormal or magical experiences in the comments. Let me know.